Turning 60 wasn't the end. It was the beginning. For most of my life I lived by the rules. Not the kind you read in books, but the silent ones. Keep the peace, don't ask for too much, put everyone else first. I was the dependable one, the mom, the wife, the friend who always showed up. I wore sacrifice like a badge of honor. But what no one told me is that when you give everything away, eventually, there's nothing left for yourself. It started unraveling slowly. My husband of 35 years left. Just left. Said he needed to find himself. Like I hadn't been losing myself piece by piece for decades. The kids were grown, too busy living lives I had helped build. Retirement loomed, but instead of feeling free, I felt invisible. Unanchored. Alone. One morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the robe he had given me one Christmas long ago, and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. I remember whispering to myself, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Tired eyes, a hollow smile, a heart so used to giving it forgot how to feel. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom, it gives you something solid to push against. That same week I signed up for a painting class. It sounds small, right? But it was huge. I hadn't picked up a brush since high school. I walked in terrified. Everyone was younger, more confident. But when I dipped that brush into color and let it glide across the canvas, something inside me stirred. It was like meeting myself again after a long, quiet absence. I started doing little things. I said no without guilt. I took solo walks. I drank wine in the bath while reading poetry. I booked a trip by myself to Italy because why not? For the first time in my life, I was living not to please or serve but to feel. And let me tell you, choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you whole. People started noticing. "You seem lighter," they said. "Happier." And it wasn't because I'd found someone new or had a grand plan. It was because I'd finally come home to myself. I know many of you are listening from places just like where I was. Kitchens filled with silence, marriages that feel like negotiations, or empty nests that echo with forgotten dreams. You're not too old. You're not too late. You're just in a new chapter, and guess what? You get to write it. Stay with me because what happened next changed everything. It started with a small gallery tucked away on a cobblestone side street in Florence. The kind of place tourists walk past without noticing. I wandered in with a gelato in one hand and no real plan, just following whatever tugged at my curiosity. The walls were lined with bold strokes, abstract colors, messy truths that looked like emotions spilled in oil and canvas. The gallery owner, an older woman with silver hair tied back in a scarf, noticed me lingering in front of one painting. It was a swirl of reds and golds and stormy gray. "That one's called Rinascita," she said. "It means rebirth." I burst into tears. Not the quiet kind either. The kind you try to stifle in public but can't. Because something in that painting, in that moment, cracked open a part of me I didn't know was still grieving. Not just the loss of my marriage or my youth, but the version of me I never let live. The woman with passion. With dreams. With fire. She invited me to sit and we talked. She told me how she didn't start painting until she was 55. After leaving a career she hated and a husband who never saw her. "We have a saying here," she said, pouring me espresso. "The second act is often the best one, but only if you're brave enough to walk on stage again." That night in my little Airbnb I painted. Not for a class, not for anyone, just for me. And it was messy. Imperfect. But it felt like truth. When I returned home I didn't go back to my old life. I couldn't. I had tasted something too real. I began hosting small art nights in my backyard. Candles, wine, soft music, and blank canvases for women like me who had forgotten what it felt like to create. First it was just neighbors and old friends. Then strangers showed up, women who had heard about that woman who paints under the string lights. Each session turned into something deeper. We weren't just painting. We were reclaiming parts of ourselves. One woman said, "I haven't felt this alive since before my kids were born." Another whispered, "I finally remembered what I like, not just what I'm good at." I realized I wasn't alone, and neither are you. And that's why I started this channel. Maybe you're listening from your car, or while folding laundry. Maybe your 60th birthday is coming, or it's long gone, or still far ahead. But if you've ever felt invisible, used up, or like your life is a script written by someone else, I'm here to tell you, you can rewrite it. The world didn't need another perfectly curated influencer. It needed someone real, someone flawed, someone who came undone, and then came alive. Because turning 60 wasn't the end. It was the moment I stopped surviving and finally started living. And just when I thought I had found my peace, something even more unexpected happened. Just when I thought I had found my rhythm, painting under string lights, sipping wine with women, learning to breathe again, life, in its perfectly unpredictable way, threw me a curveball. It started with an email. Subject line: feature request, women who inspire. First I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it. But something made me click. It was from a local magazine editor who had heard about my art nights through a friend of a friend. She wanted to interview me. Me, a woman who not long ago felt invisible even in her own home. I hesitated. I wasn't an artist. Not really. I didn't have a fancy studio or a degree. But then I remembered Florence. I remembered that gallery owner, her silver hair and her voice like warm honey, telling me that rebirth isn't about qualifications. It's about permission. Giving yourself permission to be seen. So I said yes. The article came out 2 weeks later, and I'll never forget standing in the checkout line, holding a copy in trembling hands, seeing my face on the page, paint on my cheek, eyes lit up in a way they hadn't been in years. From broken to bold. How one woman reclaimed her life at 60. That headline wasn't just a title. It was a declaration. And then the messages started rolling in. Women from all over. Some in their 30s afraid it was already too late. Others in their 70s still waiting for permission to want more. One wrote, "I've been married for 42 years and I haven't painted, danced, or laughed freely in decades. Watching you, hearing your story, it woke something up in me." Another said, "I didn't know anyone else felt this way. I thought I was crazy for wanting a second chance." And that's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. I started filming snippets of my life. Not just the pretty parts. The real parts. Me crying in the car after accidentally walking past my ex's new partner. Me laughing with strangers at the farmer's market. Me sitting in silence, sipping coffee on the porch, finally at peace with not needing to be useful every minute of the day. The response was overwhelming. The views climbed. The comments turned into conversations. People weren't just watching, they were feeling. And they stayed. Because they weren't here for polished perfection. They were here for truth. And maybe you are too. Maybe you're sitting there with a quiet ache, wondering if this is as good as it gets. Or maybe you've buried that spark so deep, you're scared it won't light again. But let me tell you, it can. It just needs air. And a little courage. That's what turning 60 gave me. Not answers, but the permission to ask better questions. So when people say, "Wow, you really reinvented yourself," I smile. Because I didn't reinvent anything. I just finally became who I was always meant to be. But here's the twist. Right when this new life felt steady, something happened that would challenge everything I'd rebuilt. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened, the kind of quiet day where nothing seems particularly special. I was prepping for one of our backyard art nights. The candles were lit, canvases laid out, soft jazz humming in the background. A few early guests trickled in, their laughter echoing like a familiar melody. Then I saw him, standing at the edge of my gate, holding a bottle of wine and looking unsure if he belonged. Was him. My ex-husband. I froze. Time slowed. My breath caught somewhere between shock and 1,000 unspoken words. The last time I'd seen him, we were signing divorce papers in a sterile office, barely able to look at each other. Now here he was, surrounded by the life I had built without him. He raised a hand in a hesitant wave. "I heard about what you're doing here," he said softly. "Our daughter sent me one of your videos. She said, you should see who mom's become." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or ask him to leave. He looked around, the glowing string lights, the women chatting with paint-splattered hands, the smell of rosemary and lavender in the air. "You look happy," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I didn't need his approval. I didn't even need his apology. His presence wasn't a threat. It was a mirror reflecting just how far I'd come. I invited him in. Not out of longing. Out of peace. He stayed for an hour. Painted quietly. Said very little. When he left, he hugged me, the kind of hug that says thank you and goodbye all at once. And I felt nothing I expected. No bitterness. No longing. Just clarity. He wasn't my ending. He was the turning point. After he left, I stood under the stars with a glass of wine, and one of the women asked, "Are you okay?" And I smiled, truly smiled, and said, "I'm more than okay. I'm free." That moment reminded me, healing doesn't always come loud and triumphant. Sometimes it walks quietly through the gate, wearing familiar shoes, and offers you one final test, to see if the life you've built is truly yours now. And mine was. But the story didn't stop there. Because a few weeks later something else happened, something I never thought would be part of my story again. A few weeks later, just as autumn began painting the leaves in shades of gold and fire, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a DM. A handwritten letter, the kind that arrives with a certain weight, not from the paper, but from the emotion sealed inside it. It was from a woman named Elise. She lived 2 states away. She'd stumbled on one of my videos, the one where I talked about staring at the mirror on my 60th birthday, unsure of who I was anymore. She wrote, "I watched your story with tears streaming down my face. Not because it was sad, but because it was me. I turned 63 last week. My husband passed 10 years ago. My kids are busy. I haven't made anything with my hands in years, not even a pie. But something about you woke something up in me. I just wanted to say thank you. I bought brushes. They're sitting on my table. I think tomorrow I'll try." I held the letter to my chest and cried. Not a sorrowful cry, but the kind that only comes when you realize your pain had a purpose. That the most broken pieces of your story can become someone else's blueprint for hope. That's when I knew I had to go deeper. It wasn't enough to create for myself anymore. This was about more than painting under string lights. This was about showing women who felt erased, forgotten, written off, that their second act wasn't a consolation prize. It could be the most powerful, most thrilling, most honest chapter yet. So I started a virtual gathering, a monthly space where women from anywhere could log in, paint or write or simply be. No expectations. No performance. Just truth. Our first call had 12 women. By the 3rd month we had over 100. Different backgrounds, different stories, but all of them carried the same quiet question in their hearts. Is it too late for me? And I got to say over and over again, no, it's just beginning. Then one night, after logging off a session where a 78-year-old woman in Arkansas shared her very first poem ever, I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. That's when I heard it. A message pinged on my phone. From someone I hadn't expected. His name was Daniel. A quiet, kind man I'd met at a bookshop downtown months earlier. We talked about a Rumi poem and laughed over how both of us liked our coffee too strong. We hadn't spoken since. I had written it off as a passing moment. But his message said, "I've been watching your videos. I didn't want to intrude, but I'd really like to see you again. If you're open to something that starts slow with friendship, honesty, and room to grow." And suddenly the door to something new cracked open again. At 60, I had lost everything I thought defined me. But at 61, I was being redefined by something far greater: love, yes, but also purpose, community, self. We met at the same bookshop where we first crossed paths. Tucked between the poetry and travel sections, the smell of old pages and fresh espresso hanging in the air. I was nervous more than I'd expected. Not because I feared rejection, but because I was showing up as someone entirely new. Unapologetic. Whole. I didn't need to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. Daniel arrived carrying a copy of Mary Oliver's Devotions. He smiled and said, "You strike me as someone who reads her slowly, like sipping something warm." He wasn't wrong. We didn't talk about the usual first date things. No resumes, no reciting greatest hits. We talked about beginnings. About grief. About what it meant to start again when the world assumes you've settled. He shared that he'd been a widower for 8 years. That he'd tried dating but always felt like he was performing some version of himself. I told him I wasn't looking for fireworks. Just peace. The kind that comes when you can be completely seen and still be soft. That evening we didn't kiss. We didn't plan the next 5 years. We just walked under amber streetlights. Two people no longer trying to fix or save anyone. Just being. And it felt sacred. Over the months our connection grew like something planted deep, watered slowly. No pressure. Just presence. He joined one of my art nights, quietly painting in the corner. Later he showed me what he made. A sweeping blend of gray and gold with a soft burst of green in the center. He called it becoming. That's the word that kept echoing in me. Not finding love again. Not getting back out there. But becoming. Because this wasn't about romance or closure, or proving anything to anyone. This was about learning how to let someone in without losing myself. One night, sitting beside him on my porch, candlelight flickering between us, he turned to me and said, "I think the most beautiful thing about you is how you turned your heartbreak into art, and your silence into a voice that other women lean on." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I just took his hand, not to hold on to him, but to honor how far I had come. And here's the truth. I never expected to fall in love again. But the biggest surprise? It wasn't just with a man. It was with my life. But the journey didn't stop there. Because something unexpected happened when one of our stories from the art night group went viral. And we got an invitation none of us saw coming. The message came through on a foggy Wednesday morning. One of those slow, gentle days when you're still in your robe at 10 a.m., sipping tea and letting silence be your soundtrack. It was from a producer at a nationally syndicated morning show. She'd seen a video someone had reposted. A clip from one of our art nights where Elise, now glowing with confidence, stood under the backyard lights reading a poem she had written. Her voice trembled, but her words struck like lightning. I am not what I was. I am what I survived. I am what I've chosen. The producer wrote, "This is the kind of story women need to hear. Not just about reinvention but reclamation. We'd love to invite you, and maybe a few of the women from your group, to share your journey on our show." I read it twice, blinking. Me? Us? A year ago I was crying in my kitchen, wondering what I had left. Now I was being asked to speak to millions. When I told the group, there were gasps, laughter, even a few tears. Elise nearly dropped her tea. Another woman, Sam, who had once whispered to me, "I haven't spoken in front of more than 3 people in 20 years, raised her hand slowly and said, "I think I'm ready." We prepped together like schoolgirls before a big recital. Picking outfits, practicing lines, cheering each other on. When we arrived at the studio, they gave us mics, fixed our hair, and called us the Second Act Collective. I stood there under studio lights looking into the camera, knowing there were women watching. Maybe folding laundry, maybe in their car outside the grocery store, who felt lost in a life that didn't look like theirs anymore. And I said, "You are not done. You are not too old. You are not too late. You don't need permission to begin again. You just need to remember you're allowed to take up space, and you're allowed to shine." The clip went viral. Millions of views. Comments from women across the world, from New Jersey to Nairobi, all echoing the same thing. You told my story. But perhaps the most surprising moment came a week later, when I received a call. Not from a show or a magazine, but from a woman who had once made herself small for decades. My sister. We hadn't spoken in years, a falling out long ago, old wounds we never tended to. Her voice cracked as she said, "I saw you on TV, and I realized I've been waiting for a moment like that in my own life. Maybe we could start again." And just like that, healing rippled outward, reaching places I thought were lost forever. Because that's the thing about choosing yourself, it doesn't end with you. It inspires others to do the same. But there was one more surprise waiting for me, something I never thought I'd say yes to. It came in a cream-colored envelope, tucked into my mailbox between a utility bill and a flyer for a local car wash. The return address was from the city's Department of Arts and Culture. I nearly dismissed it, assuming it was an event invite, maybe something to support, attend, applaud from the sidelines. But when I opened it, I had to sit down. They were inviting me to deliver the keynote address at the city's annual Women's Resilience Gala, a night dedicated to honoring women who have faced adversity and created something extraordinary from it. Me, the woman who once cried into her pillow wondering who she was without a ring on her finger or a title to her name. I stared at the letter for a long time, heart pounding, and then I laughed. A deep, surprised, tear-filled laugh. Because just a year earlier, I'd been afraid to speak up in my own living room. I said yes. The night of the gala arrived like a dream, velvet chairs, soft lights, the hum of anticipation. Daniel sat in the front row beaming. Elise was there too, holding hands with her new partner, a gentle-eyed woman she'd met at one of our virtual meetups. Even Sam flew in, wearing the red lipstick we dared each other to try months earlier. I took the stage slowly, holding nothing but the truth. And I told them. I told them about the mirror on my 60th birthday. About losing everything I thought gave me worth. About choosing myself even when I didn't feel ready. About the power of women coming together not to compete, but to witness each other. I ended with this. We are told that aging is shrinking. But I say aging is expanding. It is blooming louder, fuller, freer. We are not fading. We are finally coming into focus. The room stood still. Then applause, not the kind that bursts like fireworks, but the kind that builds slowly, like a heartbeat returning to life. That night, I didn't feel like someone who had reinvented herself. I felt like someone who had returned to herself, after a very long, very worthy journey. But if you think that was the end of the story, oh no. Because just when I thought my second act had reached its peak, something even bigger happened. Something that would take this little backyard movement and turn it into a national ripple. The email came from a literary agent in New York. She had watched our morning show segment, then dove down the rabbit hole: videos, poems, letters, live recordings of our art nights. She wrote, "You have something rare. A movement born from raw truth. Not just your story, but the stories you've unearthed in others. This needs to be a book. Not just a memoir. A guide, a companion, a fire starter." I sat with her words for days. Not because I didn't believe in the story, but because it still felt so close. So human. So mine. But then I thought of all the women who'd messaged, whispered, cried, created. The ones who said, "I didn't think I mattered anymore until I saw you." I realized this story wasn't just about me choosing myself. It was about what happens when we all do. So I wrote. Late nights, early mornings, curled on my porch with coffee and blankets. I wrote the quiet parts, the messy parts, the honest parts. The truth of what it means to rebuild when no one is watching. And the book? It became a bestseller. Not because I'm famous. Not because I had a perfect ending. But because it met women in the middle of their becoming. We called it the Second Act Collective, reclaiming life after life falls apart. Book tours followed. Retreats in the hills of Tuscany and quiet cottages in Oregon. Women gathered, laughing, painting, dancing barefoot under the stars. We didn't talk about what we'd lost. We celebrated what we'd found. Our backyard art night? It became a nonprofit. Local chapters sprang up across the country. Women leading women. No hierarchy. Just heart. And one day, during a retreat in Italy, I stood before a group of 60 women, one for every year I had lived. I looked at them and realized I was no longer the woman who waited for a better time, for approval, for a sign. I was the sign. And so are you. If you're still here, still breathing, still aching for something more, then let this be your invitation. Your spark. Your beginning. Because turning 60 wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything real. And to every woman out there who's ever asked, is it too late for me? Let this story answer for all of us. No, it's just your turn.